Perennials are supposed to come back every year. That's the deal. You plant them once, they return. At least, that's what we're told. But here's the problem. Most perennials give you a few short weeks of flowers, and then spend the next several months doing almost nothing. 3 weeks of color, then nothing. The border that looked incredible in June suddenly feels flat by July. By August, half the excitement is gone. And by September, many gardens are running almost entirely on hope. That is one of the biggest disappointments in perennial gardening. You spend good money at the nursery. You wait all year for the blooms. The flowers finally arrive. And then the show is over almost before it begins. But for many gardeners, the real problem isn't finding plants labeled as long blooming. Garden centers are full of those. The real challenge is finding the plants that actually perform, the ones that keep producing color through heat, through summer, through those long stretches when other flowers are fading out. Because the wrong plant in the wrong location can quit long before the season is over. But the right plant changes everything. Today we're looking at 7 of the strongest long-blooming perennials from the original list. These are the plants that keep working when others stop. The plants that continue bringing color into late summer. The plants that help eliminate one of the biggest problems in gardening, the bloom gap. And if you stay until the end, you'll discover which perennial may be the most overlooked late-season performer in American gardens today. Before we get started, subscribe to the channel right now. Every week, this channel delivers the kind of gardening information that saves you money at the nursery, saves time in the yard, and helps you avoid mistakes that can take years to correct. The next video on this channel is something every gardener should see before buying another perennial this season. Subscribe now so it lands in your feed the moment it goes live. Number 1 is catmint, and most gardeners underplant this one badly. That's a genuine shame, because very few perennials deliver more color for less effort across more months of the year. If your goal is to create a garden that still looks alive when summer is at its hottest, catmint deserves a place near the top of your list. When a mature planting hits its stride in early summer, the effect is hard to ignore. Soft, lavender-blue flowers seem to float above the foliage like a low purple cloud. Planted along a pathway, spilling over the edge of a border, or cascading down a gentle slope, it creates the kind of display that makes a garden feel full and finished. And unlike many perennials that peak once and disappear into the background, catmint keeps going, week after week, month after month. That's what makes it so valuable. It doesn't simply produce flowers. It extends the season. While many spring favorites are already fading, catmint continues adding color to the landscape. And that's exactly how you avoid bloom gaps. The pollinators notice it too. On a warm summer morning, you'll often find bees moving from flower to flower, almost non-stop. The planting stays active. The garden stays alive. There's movement. There's energy. There's always something happening. Now, here's the detail many gardeners miss. One reason catmint sometimes fails to live up to its reputation isn't because the plant is disappointing. It's because people stop halfway through the process. After that first major flush of blooms, a simple cutback can completely change what happens next. Reduce the plant by roughly a third. That's it. Within a few weeks, fresh growth appears. New flower stems emerge. And the plant often comes back looking fuller than it did the first time. It's a small step, but it's one of the biggest differences between a catmint planting that performs for a few weeks and one that performs for months. Give it sunshine, give it decent drainage, and it rewards you with one of the longest-lasting displays in the perennial world. That's why catmint earns the top spot on today's list. Few plants do a better job proving that non-stop color until frost is actually possible. But if catmint is one of the hardest-working perennials in America, the next plant has undergone one of the biggest transformations in modern gardening, Echinacea. And before you assume you already know this plant, stop for a moment. Because the Echinacea most gardeners picture isn't the same Echinacea being sold in nurseries today. For years, most people thought of coneflowers as a single purple flower standing quietly in the back of a border. Reliable, useful, a little predictable. Not anymore. Plant breeders have completely changed the game. Today's Echinacea comes in rich reds, warm salmon tones, golden yellows, creamy whites, even combinations that look like they belong in a professionally designed display garden. And that's exactly why more gardeners are paying attention to it again. It offers something very few perennials can match. A long bloom season combined with incredible color variety. From early summer well into fall, Echinacea continues producing flowers, while many other plants begin slowing down. And that makes it a powerful weapon against bloom gaps. But flowers are only part of the story, because when the blooms finally fade, the plant keeps contributing to the garden. Seed heads remain standing, goldfinches arrive, chickadees visit. The plant continues, providing value long after flowering season ends. Very few perennials offer color, pollinator support, and wildlife value, all in the same package. Echinacea does, and that's a big reason it remains one of the most valuable plants an American gardener can grow. Number 3 is Perennial Salvia. If catmint helps carry a garden through early summer, salvia solves a different problem entirely. It keeps the garden alive during the hottest, most difficult part of the season. Every experienced gardener knows what happens around midsummer. The excitement of spring has faded. Many early bloomers have already finished. Temperatures climb. Rain becomes less predictable. And suddenly, the garden doesn't look nearly as impressive as it did a few weeks earlier. That's where salvia earns its reputation. Its flower spikes bring strong vertical color into the landscape at exactly the moment many gardens begin losing momentum. Deep blues, rich purples, polrits, colors that remain visible, even under intense summer sunlight. And unlike many plants that produce a single flush of flowers before fading away, salvia has the potential to bloom repeatedly throughout the season. That's one reason it has become such a reliable performer in American gardens. The plant works hard, it fills space beautifully, and it attracts an incredible amount of pollinator activity. On a warm summer afternoon, bees and butterflies seem to move constantly between the flower spikes. The planting feels active, alive, like the garden is still in its prime rather than winding down. Many gardeners underestimate how important that becomes in August. Anyone can create a colorful garden in May. Maintaining that color through late summer is where the real challenge begins. Salvia helps bridge that gap. Now here's the detail that separates average salvia from exceptional salvia. Deadheading. Many gardeners skip it. The plant blooms, the flowers fade, and everything is simply left in place. But when spent flower spikes are removed, the plant responds with fresh growth and another wave of flowers. Instead of putting energy into seed production, it focuses on blooming again. It's a small task, a few minutes here and there, but it can dramatically extend the season of color. That's why experienced gardeners often get far more performance from salvia than beginners. The difference usually isn't the plant. It's the maintenance. Give salvia full sun. Stay consistent with deadheading, and it becomes one of the strongest midsummer color producers you can grow. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now. You've already seen the kind of practical information this channel delivers. And every week we share more proven gardening strategies, plant recommendations, and growing tips designed to help you build a better garden with fewer mistakes. Now let's move to a perennial that solves a completely different challenge. Chaude. Number 4 is Heuchera, commonly called coral bells. And for gardeners working with partial shade, dappled light, or difficult areas beneath trees, this plant can be a game changer. Most long-blooming perennials want sunshine, lots of it. Heuchera takes a different approach. It brings color to places where many flowering plants struggle. That's why experienced gardeners often consider it one of the most valuable foliage perennials available. Notice I said foliage perennial, because while Heuchera does produce attractive sprays of flowers, the real show happens lower down. The leaves are what make this plant special. Modern varieties come in shades of deep burgundy, caramel, silver, lime green, purple, and nearly every color in between. Instead of delivering a few weeks of interest, those leaves remain attractive for months. That's a huge advantage when you're trying to create color that lasts until frost. Flowers come and go. Strong foliage keeps working. And Heuchera may be one of the best examples of that principle. The flowers certainly have value. Hummingbirds frequently visit them. The delicate stems create movement above the foliage, and they add another layer of interest to the planting. But even when flowering ends, the plant continues contributing to the garden. That's something many perennials simply can't do. Now let's address one of the biggest questions that repeatedly appeared in comments on the original video. What if my garden doesn't get enough sun? It's a fair question. Not everyone has wide-open flower beds receiving sunlight all day long. Many gardeners are working around mature trees, fences, neighboring homes, or naturally shaded properties. That's where Heuchera shines. Rather than fighting those conditions, it often performs best in them. And that makes it an incredibly useful tool for extending color into parts of the landscape where other plants struggle. There is one small detail worth remembering. In colder regions, repeated freezing and thawing can gradually push the crown upward during winter. A quick inspection in early spring is usually all it takes to fix the issue. Gently settle the plant back into place, and it will often continue performing beautifully for years. Simple, easy, and well worth the effort. But if Heuchera thrives where sunlight is limited, the next perennial thrives where heat is relentless. It loves sunshine. It handles hot summers with ease. And once it begins blooming, hummingbirds seem to find it almost immediately. Number 5 is Agastache. And this is the plant that often wins over gardeners and hummingbirds at exactly the same time. If you've never grown Agastache before, the first thing you'll probably notice is how quickly it becomes one of the busiest plants in the garden. The flower spikes seem to stay in constant motion. Bees arrive, butterflies follow, and hummingbirds often begin visiting long before many other late-season perennials hit their stride. That's one reason Agastache has developed such a loyal following across much of the country. But wildlife isn't the main reason it belongs on today's list. Its timing is. Many gardens look fantastic in June. A surprising number still look good in July. But by August, things start changing. The summer heat takes its toll. Early bloomers are finished. Color becomes harder and harder to maintain. That's when Agastache becomes incredibly valuable. While other plants are slowing down, Agastache is often entering its strongest period of performance. Its flower spikes continue producing color through the hottest weeks of the year and frequently keep going right up until frost. That's exactly the type of plant gardeners need if the goal is season-long color. Modern varieties have only increased its appeal. Today's selections offer shades of lavender, coral, peach, magenta, and rose that fit beautifully into almost any garden design. And unlike some highly bred ornamentals that sacrifice performance for appearance, Agastache generally delivers both beauty and endurance. Now here's the detail that determines whether Agastache becomes one of the best plants in your garden or one of the most disappointing. Drainage. Many gardeners assume winter cold is what kills Agastache. Often it isn't. Poor drainage is usually the real culprit. In heavy soils that remain wet for extended periods, the plant can struggle regardless of hardiness zone. But when planted in well-drained conditions, Agastache becomes remarkably dependable. That's especially true in regions where summer heat pushes other perennials to their limits. Agastache doesn't just survive those conditions, it often thrives in them. And that's why it has earned a reputation as one of the best long-blooming perennials for hot summer gardens. But if Agastache brings energy and movement to the late summer landscape, the next plant brings something completely different. Drama. Number 6 is Crocosmia, and few perennials create a stronger visual impact in midsummer and late summer than this one. When Crocosmia comes into bloom, subtlety disappears. Arching stems rise above the foliage, carrying brilliant flowers in shades of fiery orange, scarlet red, and glowing gold. The effect is impossible to ignore, even from across the garden. That's a major reason gardeners continue planting it year after year. It arrives precisely when many other flowers are beginning to lose momentum. Instead of watching color gradually fade away through July and August, Crocosmia introduces an entirely new wave of excitement. The flowers seem almost electric in afternoon sunlight, and because they sit above elegant sword-like foliage, they create movement as well as color. That's something many perennial borders lack during the second half of summer. Energy. Crocosmia restoresit. Hummingbirds certainly agree. The tubular flowers act like magnets. Plant a group near a patio, deck, or favorite seating area, and you'll likely notice more hummingbird activity throughout the season. It's one of those plants that brings the garden to life in a very visible way. Now let's talk about one of the biggest concerns gardeners have with Crocosmia: winter survival. In colder regions, some gardeners are disappointed when plants fail to return after a particularly harsh winter. But the issue is often less complicated than it appears. A layer of mulch applied before winter arrives can help protect the corms from repeated freeze-thaw cycles. It's a simple step, yet it can make a meaningful difference in long-term performance. And when Crocosmia returns successfully each year, the reward is one of the most dramatic late-summer displays available in a perennial garden. But while Crocosmia dominates the middle of the season, The final plant on today's list excels when many gardens are nearly out of color altogether. Number 7 is Chelone, also known as turtlehead. And this may be one of the most overlooked late-season perennials in American gardening. The flowers are unlike almost anything else in the landscape. Their unique shape immediately attracts attention. In fact, gardeners often find themselves answering the same question whenever Chelone is blooming. What is that? That's how distinctive it looks. But appearance alone isn't what earns Chelone a place on this list. Timing does. When many perennials are preparing to shut down for the year, Chelone is just getting started. Its bloom season arrives late, often very late, and that's exactly what makes it so valuable. By late summer, many gardeners are desperately searching for fresh color. The spring flowers are long gone. The midsummer stars are beginning to fade. Yet Chelone continues producing bloom after bloom as the season moves toward autumn. It helps extend the garden when extension matters most. And that brings us back to the central promise of today's video. Color that lasts longer. Color that bridges seasonal gaps. Color that remains present when many gardens are beginning to wind down. Chelone performs particularly well in locations where moisture remains consistent. Low areas, woodland edges, partially shaded spaces, places where many other late-season bloomers struggle. Instead of fighting those conditions, it embraces them. Now here's the one thing to remember. Chelone does not enjoy prolonged dry spells. When moisture levels remain steady, performance improves dramatically. The foliage stays healthier, the flowers last longer, and the overall display becomes far more impressive. It's a simple requirement, but understanding it allows the plant to deliver exactly what gardeners want. Reliable color late in the season. And that's ultimately what every plant on today's list helps accomplish. Catmint, Echinacea, Salvia, Heuchera, Agastache, Crocosmia, and Chelone. 7 perennials that prove you don't need to accept bloom gaps as part of gardening. Choose the right plants, put them in the right conditions, and your garden can remain colorful far longer than most people think possible. If you've enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel right now. Every week we share practical, experience-based gardening advice that helps gardeners avoid expensive mistakes, discover better performing plants, and build landscapes that stay beautiful throughout the growing season. And before you go, let us know in the comments, which of these perennials already grows in your garden? And which one are you most excited to try next? Gardeners from all over the country read those comments, share their experiences, and help each other discover what truly performs in different regions. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.